So thanks once again, Justine, for giving that very nice and a detailed overview. And to all the participants, I'll also request to please make the time to go back to the first module. Yeah, it's easier said than done. There are 10 hours worth of lectures there and discussions, but you might still find some useful content. And you can ask Justine or me, and we should be able to point you specifically to which element to look for, because a lot of what we are talking about, what we will be talking about, is discussed at a slightly greater in a slightly greater detail earlier. So we'll try to not spend too much time on some of those elements. But please, at any point in time, if you think you have the need to look at one of those issues, or you want to discuss something in greater detail, just let us know. Okay, so as you all know, species distribution is, if and I remember Justine mentioned this very nicely, that it's one of the two primary steps to achieve pause. One of them is, of course, to count how many snow leopards, and incidentally, we did that already in the module 1. We try to understand how, using camera traps, we can estimate snow leopard populations, or populations of any cryptic species, a species which is not easy to detect. The second element of pause process is that of species distribution. And the reason we need that is there's and again, very good answers during the initial questions that Justine posed, that it is to be able to determine our effort in terms of where we should go and sample, how much do we need to sample, and what is the ultimate area that we are going to call upon, saying that, okay, this is the area in which we have X number of snow leopards or any other species of interest. So I think it's very important to know where a species is distributed for us to be able to come back and say how many there are. And they go kind of hand in hand. It's no surprise that species distributions or abundances, or sort of monitoring of biological parameters is part of ecological research almost everywhere. Now, whether you need to understand ecological processes, why something is happening the way it is, if you are simply interested in the academics aspect of it, like you want to know why a certain phenomena is happening. If you're a conservationist, you might be interested in making decisions about, or let's say prioritizing your conservation action in a certain area, or deciding which area can be kept as multiple use, or identifying areas which could be, let's say, core zones of a protected area, or whatever. So there's a lot of decision making that goes into conservation, and incidentally, decision making starts from a small organizational group or a conservationist, all the way till policymakers. Policymakers make larger decisions, and at any scale, the more information you have, the better the decision you will make, and the less worry you will have of being or let me put it this way, and the less reason you will have to be defensive about it. If you're making an informed decision, and this is a very important point, I learned it almost 8-9 years ago in a very nice conversation by one of my PhD advisors, Raghu Chundawat, and he said it very nicely. He said that if you're making a decision based on your gut, your belief, then you'll be very defensive about trying to protect it, saying that no, I know this is right because I feel it. But if you're making a decision based on information and data, then you don't have to be defensive about it. You just project the data. This is why it is the way it is. And if you are wrong, you get an opportunity to improve and course correct. And that's where the next point also comes in, that course correction can happen in your understanding of the way things work. It can happen on the conservation action you're taking. It can happen at multiple levels. So monitoring programs, they allow us to do course corrections. And most importantly, and this is one element which often we tend to forget, especially as a conservationist or as a researcher, we tend to forget that whatever you're doing should be replicable. And by replicable, I don't mean to say that a Rab Nawaz should be able to go every year into a certain mountain in Pakistan and do the survey and come back with comparable results. But if Rab Nawaz has done a survey in year one, next year someone else might go there. The third year, another person might go there. The fourth year, Rab Nawaz might be able to go back again. All of these data sets should be comparable. If they're not comparable, then it's a bias, and we don't even know the source of that bias, and we will never be able to compare those figures. And these are some of the challenges we often face when we are talking about long-term monitoring programs or species distributions or species abundances and so on. Now, it's most important right at the beginning to clearly identify what is the purpose that you're going out with. Yes, I mean, pause process is all about snow leopard abundance, but it's also about snow leopard distribution. So if you're interested in abundance, please have a very clear question that you want to know how many snow leopards or how many Pallas cat or how many lynx are in a certain area. Based on abundance based parameters, it's possible over time that you can monitor population dynamics, which could include survival, mortality, recruitment, migration, and so on. But all of this requires population level data. You need to know how many snow leopards and which of those snow leopards or other individuals are moving out, moving in, and so on. But the problem with abundance level the data is that it's not just expensive, it's extremely effort intensive. And broadly speaking, if we really want to go and survey every nook and corner of the entire snow leopard range, I think we'll never have the resources to do that. Some very basic back of the envelope calculations indicated it's anywhere between $600 to $700 million is what you will need to estimate snow leopard abundance in every nook and corner where they are found. Practically, financially, uh, not just impossible, but completely not worth it as well. Coming back to it, so yes, you do abundance in certain estimation in certain areas. In those areas where you have long-term data or you plan to be there for a certain longer period of time, you can estimate some of these more finer population parameters such as survival, mortality, and so on. And they really provide a very valuable knowledge kit to you or to any manager or any management unit to be able to take decisions and make informed decisions or course correct or whatever. A slightly lower resolution of information you get with spatial distribution, but in no universe it is any less important or relevant than abundance estimation. And the reason being, to know how many snow leopards are there, you need to first know where they are. And where they are is often the most uh, poorly estimated parameter. We seldom invest enough resources to estimate species distributions. Most distribution maps of species across the world are based on expert opinion. We will go a little further today to see how good or bad expert opinion can be. I'm not denying its value. It's extremely valuable to get started, but it's extremely dangerous to be entirely reliant upon that. And that's where a reliable, replicable distribution survey or a species distribution survey it becomes valuable. What you can always do with species distribution surveys is, yes, you will not know how many snow leopards or how many individuals, but you will definitely be able to project or project forward or project even back in time where the species is expanding its range, or in which areas the species is going locally extinct, if at all that's happening. And that becomes a very crucial element. And especially in today's times, you're talking about climate change, we're talking about habitat losses because of large infrastructure projects which are poorly planned. We're talking about roads cutting into landscapes. And all of these are going to have a much more rapid impact in terms of local extinctions and potentially even local colonizations than what you might be able to observe in the population level in many cases, just for the sheer size of the effort that it might potentially take. Okay, and then of course, when you have, if you can get data, spatial data about more than one species, you can use it to estimate species richness, which is a very, very valuable tool for a lot of management units, especially when you're making a stronger case that why do you want to conserve, let's say, a tiger. Now, yes, tiger is a gorgeous animal. It's a beautiful species, one of the biggest cats, but that's not it. It's because it is an indicator of an entire ecosystem, just like the snow leopard. And there are times you need to provide a reliable estimation or a reliable estimator of how many species are in a certain area, and is there a spatial difference or variation in the species richnesses spatially. And those at times become extremely valuable estimators to define management units. And lastly, I think a lot of you may have heard or seen instances where removal of one species has suddenly led to proliferation or a local colonization of another. Usually happens with mesopredators versus large predators. You take out one large predator, suddenly mesopredators start spreading, and they have cascading impacts across the entire trophic system. And that's where it becomes important sometimes, not always, sometimes it becomes important to understand the interactions between species. And because none of the species, as Justine said, can be observed with 100% confidence, it's really valuable and important to look at those in much more sophisticated and reliable and replicable frameworks. Coming back to snow leopards, you all might, or many of you who were not in school or much younger at that time, but in 2008, there was a international snow leopard conference in Beijing where experts or snow leopard experts from across the world came together. I think there were more than 100 people who came together for a 3-day conference organized by Panthera and WCS, and they came up and mapped diligently areas that each of these experts knew about snow leopard's presence or potential presence, or they had heard about snow leopard's presence or a kill made by a snow leopard or someone having killed a snow leopard or whatever. It was an incredible exercise, extremely powerful get together where people like George Scheller was there, Rodney Jackson was there, Tom McCarthy, Raghu Chundawat, everybody who had done anything about snow leopards at that time was there. And what they did, they came up with a fantastic map, the map that we still use as the snow leopard distribution map. Now, this map provides us a very, let me put it this way, a fairly reasonable idea of where snow leopards are. And in most areas or in most places, it still holds fairly accurate. And that's been the first development. That's been the first development of that came out of this conference. There was another layer associated with the same map, which was a sort of a classification, and that makes it very interesting. That it's only the green areas that you see here are where it was confirmed that snow leopards are found. Everywhere else, it was predicted, expected, anticipated, or possible, right? There was no confirmation nobody knew whether there were snow leopards or not, but they expected them to be there for various reasons, be it data based, or someone had heard from someone. But to look at it, it's a very interesting uh, uh, element that comes into the map, that there's a lot of uncertainty, and unfortunately, it's an uncertainty that's heavily tied with not where snow leopards are, but where snow leopard researchers have been, and that's been a bit of a challenge. Nevertheless, when you look at the map like this, it still makes the most sense as of now. But this is a very interesting classification within that map. Um, for all that you may say about expert opinion, this one is quite an impressive and fairly accurate depiction of where snow leopards are currently distributed or expected to be currently distributed. So now you all have mentioned many of these methods in the chat, so I would not spend too much time, but there are not just one or two, but there are tons of methods out there to estimate species distributions. Generalized linear models, generalized additive models, Maxent, of course, one of all of our favorites. GARP is one, ANN is there. So it's just, you just go on, go to any of those the places where people discuss, or any of those groups where people discuss SDM, as they call it, species distribution models, and you'll see a ton of these possible models available to you. Many of us have also used and published data based on maximum entropy. Some of us have earlier worked on something that used to be known as ecological niche factor analysis and other tools, which primarily are based on an assumption that you can't estimate absence, and which is a fairly good assumption. It's very difficult to determine where absence is, but in the same light, it's also an important point that you need to take into consideration what potentially could be absence. And I'll talk a little bit about this further down, but Maxent being one of the most frequently and most popularly used machine learning based tool for species distribution modeling, it's received a fair share of criticism and support. At the same time, as recently as about a year ago, Maxent came up with a package which is unraveling the black box that it used to be called as, and they have now come up with open source code for Maxent so that you can understand what's going on. But before that happened, there's a lot of publication, and I'll strongly recommend. In fact, we will email this to you today itself. These different publications which talk about various elements of comparing Maxent with various other methods, and trying to give us a better understanding of what's going on. Right now, it's a very useful tool, but there are a few issues that cannot be ignored. Now, this reading list, if you can go through it, and all these links have actual papers that you can download and read up, please do spend some time reading those, because it really helps us understand what a tool such as Maxent, which is based entirely on presence only data, is capable of, and what it is not capable of. Now, there are debates where both methods are discussed and reviewed in great detail, as I mentioned. The bottom line is, please don't use a method without critically reviewing it, like what it is, how it works, and more importantly, without understanding what it is not capable of. And these are very important elements, and there's a lot of discussion going on about um, you know how easy should a tool's implementation be made, because there is a threshold. When you bring a tool's ease of use below that, then it just gets sometimes overused or even abused, and then it kind of loses its critical value. So and Maxent is one of those tools which is just so easy to use. All you need is 5 layers, 100 or 50 or 20, whatever number, let's say 5 data points, and it'll it'll churn out a beautiful map. And many times those maps do look pretty neat, and there are nice little graphs, there are nice little curves, which can potentially be explained. But there are a few challenges, which I'll not get into much detail, but please read these materials and you'll find it fascinating, the kind of detail into which some of these authors have and statisticians have gone to understand and decipher the nuances of these methods. Now, you all will appreciate that when you don't see something, it doesn't mean that it is not there. Now, the picture on the right that you see, there is a snow leopard. I'm sure you guys can closely have a look and you'll notice the snow leopard. But the point that I'm trying to make here is, A, absence does contain very valuable information. Number two, it's easier said than done. You say that, okay, I go to an area and I don't, let's say I go to my office building, and in my room I don't see a mouse, and I say there is no mouse in our office. But it's just me not detecting it. It's not that the mouse is not there. Maybe there is a mouse, or maybe there is no mouse, right? And that uncertainty is a bit of a challenge that we need to deal with. The bigger issue with absences is that when you say, and that's something that happens often when you're using generalized linear models or even generalized additive models, that these models assume everywhere where you haven't seen a certain species as a point of absence. Now, the reliability of that point being a point of absence is questionable. Just like there is a possibility of a false absence, which means you think it is not there, but it's actually that you haven't detected it. Like I couldn't detect a mouse in my office, but there was a mouse actually eating up all the paperwork. There's also a problem with false positives. Now, there are times when people have falsely detected a species in a certain area where in reality it may not be there. Now, you do have problems happening on both these ends, and these are detection related issues. These are issues that Justine has put so much of emphasis on a few minutes ago. And it's very crucial that we look into these elements as well. Third, the last point here is that if I'm going into a certain area and let me give you an example. I think we all know a lot of species distribution maps today are created based on collections or hunting records or places where animals have been found, dead or alive. Now, this is a very useful data, extremely valuable data, but if you use it without curating it, you're likely to bluff your model into believing that this is where you have more of a species, and where you don't have someone going and surveying, this is you have less of a species. More to the point of what we are seeing in the snow leopard map, where areas where you have not really surveyed, it doesn't mean that there are no snow leopards. You assume that maybe there are snow leopards, but you don't know. But the point is that there could be a snow leopard, and if you use any of these presence only models which don't take into account effort and coverage, then there is a very strong likelihood that it might bluff the model into believing something which may not be true. And that's something that we have to look into. One of the reasons why right from the outset we are going to be focusing a lot of our understanding of or how we estimate species distributions using occupancy methods is that we need to be able to address some of these basic issues that I'm just mentioning. By the way, just to show you where the snow leopard is, the hilarious part here is that not just us, but even an ibex whose life depends on being able to spot a snow leopard is seeing completely at the wrong place. I don't know if you can see it, but this is where the snow leopard is.
Where, Can you show us?
I'm just pointing. Yeah, I'm just getting the pen out there. There.
Oh, okay.
So even the IBEX has got it completely wrong. Anyway, now talking about a snow leopard getting it wrong, I have a little exercise for you all. It's probably a little break, but I think it's going to be a bit of a mind bender. If you all can do a small favor, if you can take a screenshot and put it on your either on a Microsoft PowerPoint or any other place or Word or wherever, and just try to, oops, let me remove this one first. Yeah, and just try to find out where, in which, or just shade it or put a marker or whatever. Just identify which all grids have T, the letter T, capital letter T in them. If you can just spend the next two minutes, and we'll start the clock now. Yeah, in the next 2 minutes, just spend 2 minutes to quickly mark those grids which have T in them. Take a screenshot. If you're using a Windows computer, you can use the window button and S, and it will open a screen capture window. You can copy and paste it wherever you want. You can use the print screen button. And I think there's something similar on Mac as well. Justine, can you tell what do you do to get a screen share, a screen grab?
Command Shift 1 or 2, I think.
Yeah.
Normally.
So maybe I'll mention it here. So just spend a couple of minutes. It's a bit of a, consider it a little break, and then we'll move to the to an example of what we've been trying to talk about.
Kustu, can you remind people what we have to do? So you have to kind of fill in the grids that have a T.
Yeah. So once you've taken a screenshot, for example, let me just show you one. I think, oh, there it is. So I see a T here. So I'll just shade it like this. Just shade it. That's all. Or put a marker, whatever. You can shade it, or you can put a marker like an X or something. Just do whatever you think you can on any of your.
Yes,
Yeah.
the whole cell, Ranjini, the whole cell. But just, are you sure it's not a trick question, Gustav? It's all sevens. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I just showed there's one T. There's definitely one T.
We need more. Sherry's saying she needs new glasses.
Yeah, but don't worry about how many T's in a box. A box may have a T, it may have 2 or 3 T's, or it may have no T's. Just see how many T's you can identify. Okay. Close says 17 boxes. Has it? Okay. I don't know. Let's see. Letro found 21. Okay. No, you're counting T's. You just have to shade T's. Like you see my screen. I have shaded a T. Just try to shade all the T's. You'll see something funny. All the grid cells which have a T in them, just shade them. Just shade them. Okay, we've already 2.5 minutes. Of course, Ram, you're right. You're right. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to move forward. Most of you have seemingly got it. I should make it a little more complicated next time. But some of you might have actually got this shape. Now, consider this a species distribution. T is the species of our interest. 7 is the habitat it lives in. It's not an easy task. Right now, yes, there were a few number of 7s. Imagine if I had double, triple, or even more. The point is, and some of you said 21, some of you said 17, a couple of you got it correct on 18. Yes, Chloe, don't worry. It happens. It happens with me all the time. I have to literally go point by point to count, and I'm terrible at counting. But yes, the bottom line being that a species distribution can be, you can end up with different distributions for the for the same reality, there could be 3 different maps. And I'll just characterize this with this little example of what recently was done in Mongolia. So in 2018, WWF Mongolia, Snow Leopard Conservation Foundation in Mongolia, the GSLEP program, Snow Leopard Trust, Wildlife Conservation Society, and several institutions, including the National University of Mongolia and Mongolian University, I think, National, yeah. Anyways, all these institutions and partners, they joined hands to conduct the first. Well, the goal was to estimate how many snow leopards in Mongolia. But as we discussed, as Justine started with, we also need to know where are the snow leopards. So it was a two-part exercise. In the first part, or in one part, an extensive survey was planned to estimate snow leopard distribution across Mongolia. And in the second part, not necessarily waiting for the first part to be over, but almost simultaneously, population assessment surveys using camera traps and spatial capture recapture were initiated in several of the study areas. And you might remember Justine showed you a very interesting map of several locations which were being sampled. All of these were being sampled before we had the data on snow leopard distribution from the country. This was based on where we expected snow leopards to be based on the earlier expert opinion map. The purpose of this survey was to verify existing snow leopard distribution map, but more importantly, to create a surface that can be considered as a possible stratification surface so that abundance surveys can be prioritized accordingly. Let's say the entire distribution map that was presented by the expert opinion, and it's a binary map. You have snow leopards or you don't have snow leopards. Let's say if we were using that as a stratification, we would have had to survey a lot more than what we probably had the resources for. Because we were able to generate a surface, an occupancy-based surface, it allowed us to be able to, I wouldn't like to use the word extrapolate, but I would like to suggest it allowed us to be able to predict snow leopard abundance in areas which were not sampled, but another representative or a few representative sites with similar characteristics were sampled. So it allowed us to be able to estimate those values in those areas. And those areas where you had very low occupancy or low density, that's where currently the surveys are going on. Now, okay, so as you will all appreciate, snow leopards do have some clear weaknesses. They can't live without mountains. And this is where I'm almost repeating myself that, and actually I have a number here. So there were 12 universities and the government of Mongolia's overall support allowed us to do this planning exercise where we organized this training come planning meeting in Ulaanbaatar, where several people came together. The goal ultimately was to figure out where or the areas that snow leopards are occupying and how. Now, it's nothing less than a monumental feat what our friends from Mongolia achieved. These 12 teams, I think they had about 60 researchers. They then partnered with 126 rangers, and this massive team went out and traversed almost 20,000 kilometers worth of transects in the next 6 months. The surveys covered more than, how much was it? 2,400 into 1,000, almost 480,000, almost 500,000 square kilometer of the potential distribution range of snow leopards in Mongolia. Now, personally, I have never seen data sets of this proportions. And when the data set came back, we will return to this slide when we do some analysis to see how these results pan out. But the results were very exciting because we were able to find very good predictors in some of the expected covariates. And what covariates are, don't worry right now, we'll come back to it. But bottom line being that the results were very encouraging. It provided us a very dependable and explainable outcome. And as Justine said, all models are wrong, some are useful. In our case, those useful models made complete sense of what we were looking for. So it was a very encouraging exercise overall to be able to come up with those models, and we were able to estimate or come up with areas which had very high likelihood or high probability of being used by snow leopards, areas which were relatively less, and almost negligibly likely to be used by snow leopards. So what you're seeing here is perhaps the first most comprehensively estimated distribution map of snow leopards from an entire country, in this case, Mongolia. And it's fascinating how it compares with the historic binary or maxent based probabilistic maps. Both of them assume almost like something like perfect detection of the species of interest. Now, we created several thresholds to determine the best possible match between the occupancy based map and the other map. And I'm just going to talk about one example. If you look carefully to the left-hand side, this is a threshold of 50%, right? Now, imagine if in a certain grid, the probability of a snow leopard using that grid cell is more than 50%, then I will say snow leopard is there. And if it is less than 50%, let's say I will say, okay, it's probably not there. You have, I mean, in any map or in any visual representation of a species distribution, we do create these cutoffs, even though statisticians warn against doing those, but to understand them better, you need to create those cutoffs. And since some of the earlier maps already come with cutoffs, I think it was an important exercise. Now, what you see here is, the yellow patches are where the occupancy map or the occupancy generated map is predicting no snow leopard presence, but another method is predicting snow leopard presence. Now you look at it carefully, you'll find it fascinating that the expert opinion based map is hugely overestimating snow leopard distribution. On the left hand side, if you see that map, this one, you will see that it's predicting snow leopard distribution in areas much wider than where the occupancy based map is predicting at a 50% cutoff, at a cutoff of 0.5 probability. Not just that, I mean, that's one side, right? You're overestimating species distribution. Look at these parts on top here, over here. Now, in this area, it's missing possible presence of snow leopards in parts of the distribution range where neither neither the expert opinion based map nor the presence only data or maxent based map predicted snow leopard distribution. But later, with camera trapping, snow leopard was found to be using these two areas. Now, in both these cases, it turns out the occupancy based map was faring better, at least these random checks, cross validations that we've had. Now, if you look at the maxent based map on the right hand side, you will see that it fared slightly better. It still, if you look carefully, it predicted snow leopard distribution in areas where even camera trapping is reporting very low distribution or very low abundance or negligible abundance, but occupancy map at 50% cutoff did not predict snow leopard presence. So you see there were differences, and even when you look at and this is something Ian can explain better when he comes on the 23rd, so we didn't stop at 50% cutoff. We kept reducing it to a point where we thought maybe there will be the best possible match. But even at the point when there was the best possible match, the occupancy based map differed from Maxent or expert opinion based map by at least 14 to 15%. Now that's something very interesting to note. And again, none of these methods are right. None of these methods are wrong. They're all extremely valuable. It's just that they have each of them has their own limitations, and they have their own value of where and how and for what purpose they can be used for. Let me clear the drawings. Right, so broadly speaking, both expert opinion based maps and presence only maps differed from the occupancy maps. You look at the right side right now, you will see we've used several cutoffs here all the way till 0.006. Even in that case, we had a difference between the three maps. Both were missing some areas. In fact, I think, yeah, this area was missed by both the earlier maps, but predicted by occupancy-based maps. In this area, the other maps predicted snow leopard distribution, but occupancy did not predict snow leopard distribution. And this area, if you look carefully, the previous maps predicted fairly consistent and uniform or a smooth distribution, whereas in case of occupancy, it projected some sort of a fragmented or disconnected distribution. And hopefully soon you'll hear from our teams in Mongolia that areas which we thought were low occupancy are quite likely devoid of snow leopards entirely. Right, so with that, I'd like to stop here for a minute and maybe just kind of do a bit of just go back to whatever we have discussed so far. If you could please put in the chat window, what do you think should be the elements of a good distribution survey? Feel free to put your points in the chat window. I'll try to write them here so that we can kind of discuss them. But again, remember, there's no wrong answers. So whatever you have, and while you're doing that, we can also quickly review some questions if there are.
There's a few questions from Jano asking what were the details of the Maxent general settings?
Yeah, I'll just
the comparison.
I'll just come to it. Okay, after the smile, 18 box. There. Okay, we'll start with Rub. So Rub, you asking how much it cost? How much what cost? I'm sorry, I missed that point.
The Mongolia.
The surveys.
Yeah, the whole.
It's not astronomical at all. In fact, it was. Justine, do you have any memory? How much did it cost? It was a very, very surprisingly manageable amount that we were talking about.
Yeah, it was definitely under 100,000. Definitely under that. And we were quite shocked how reasonable it was. I would even say around 50,000 or less. Something, it wasn't much more than that, if I recall. But we'd have to get back to you on that, Ram.
Yeah. Great. Ranjani, what do you? I'm sorry, Ranjani. It's a bit of a mind bender. So let me explain it again. You see the legends there. The yellow means areas where whether it is the earlier expert opinion based map, which is the left side, or the Maxent based map, where these maps are predicting snow leopard distribution, but occupancy is predicting absence. Absence here we mean less than 0.5 probability of site use. So areas where Maxent was higher than 0.5 and occupancy estimate was less than 0.5, they are yellow. Or in other words, areas where the expert opinion map said this is where snow leopards are likely to be, but our occupancy based map said no, this is not where snow leopards could be. Again, 0.5 being the cutoff. But again, as you see in the next map, the cutoff has been changed to multiple. So it's been tried at 0.0. Oops, sorry. There. It's been tried at 0.06, 0.09, 0.259, and 0.5. So what I'm showing in the previous slide is just this one, but it has been tested at multiple levels, and at each level there's a fair bit of a disagreement between the two maps. And these ones, as you can see, they're anyway of very little consequence or value. So yeah. Okay, I'll just come back to others of you. Right.
Can you repeat the question, Kustub? I think
Yes, I'll come to the question. Yeah, just one second. Sorry, Letro, I'll just come to it. I'm just looking. Yeah, so the question I have here is, oops. Yeah. What are the elements? What should be an element of a good distribution survey? Let me give you one, for example, one point that I feel is the most, to me, it's very important. Let's say they should be replicable. What else do you think makes an important element for a distribution survey? What else should be considered? What else should be a point of concern or worry or decision making that this method I will use, or this is how I will do my survey? What are those elements that we need? Okay, thank you. Estimate P, yes, good job. Thank you, Chloe.
Can you remind everyone what P is, Kustub?
Yeah, I've just
or
mentioned here.
detectability.
Yes. Great, thank you. Anybody else? Ursa Flizzar is saying, I think you need to be able to know if your methods allow you to trust presence absence data, questionnaires versus. Is that all right to say reliability of the data being used? Ursa, does that make sense? Okay. Ranjana says it should be representative sampling. Fantastic point. Effort, excellent. By the way, if you guys go through the list of papers that I've shared, there's a very nice paper by Jim Nichols and his colleagues about using some of these what are they called? Citizen science approaches to collect data which is statistically valid as well. It's a fascinating, very small paper, not very long, too extensive, but it's a very nice little opinion piece. And it has extremely useful guidelines. So please, I'll very strongly recommend you go through that paper, which is there in the list. If you're interested in expanding data collection to a wide number of people who might just be interested. And again, all of these methods, yes, they're valid for snow leopards, but they're also valid for, let's say, a munia or a peregrine falcon or any other species of interest. Okay, Letro says, okay, before that, survey area. Sampling should be sampling to be a between, oops, that point went up. Sorry, too many points coming in. Trade-off between effort and representability of the area. Okay, fair enough. Sampling methods. So Alireza, I might request, when you say sampling methods, you might want to think through a little more. What is it that we need or not need in a sampling methods, right? Yes, sampling methods are very important, but do you think the point made earlier that the reliability of the data being used, does that somewhere address your sampling issues, or there's more to it? So just think through that point as well, please. Okay. Homo Genity of effort. All right. Then sortable variables. Cost effective. I love that point, Nilofer. Very, very important point. It should be cost effective. We don't want to spend like $1 million in finding where a species of marmots distributed, right? We need to be for the methods to be cost effective. Okay,
卫
size
星
of
电
this.
话卡1年的话费，卫星电话
Okay. Oh well, I'm just loving all these points. I won't be able to write all of them down, I think, but let me see if I can still. Mean season. Very good point, Muzaffar. To be detected. Yep. If you want to do a marmot survey and you go out and do it in the winter, you'll come back with 0 distribution of marmots. A very valuable point. Even bear, for that matter, those bears that hibernate, you will never come up with the distribution unless you sample them in a season where they will have at least some point level of detectability. Accessibility or Abdul Bakar, do you mean accessibility of the area? Okay. All right. Okay. The species itself. Fair enough. Haha. Yes, of course, Justine. Okay. Great. The only point, if I may add here, is I think you've already sampling. I think the effort got involved already. Yep. There's just one more point I'd like to add here is that they should be in outputs to be in the compare of methods or the only other point I think I had put down here was outputs should be independent. It shouldn't be that if, as Justine, again, and I'm almost repeating what Justine mentioned, but if Justine goes out and does a survey, she comes up with a distribution map. And if I go out and do a survey and I say that, oh, the species is like in 25%, it's because I didn't see it the rest of the time. And that's where I'm getting biased, right? So yes, I know, Justin, we have only 30 minutes to go. Well, it's almost tradition. We go a bit off over time, so please bear with us. But I'll try to, I think, complete the next one in about 30 minutes or so. But yes, so that's a wonderful collection of important points that you all have mentioned here. I'll be able to save it, I think. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think that's the core of the whole issue that we had to discuss here.